Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Leadership Project Live. We're greatly honored that you joined us today for what's going to be a really interesting conversation about an incident that everyone is talking about, but the real essence is that we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and unpacking what it means to be emotionally intelligent and to think about what you might have considered to have done in the same situation. So got some people joining us now already. I've got some of my team looking forward to the conversation about emotional intelligence and what we can learn about what happened from that incident and put it into our own lives. You've got Rika here saying, here we go. She's excited for the show today. We're excited to have you as well, Rika. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you are just tuning in, please do let us know where you're connecting from and if there's anything in particular that you're excited about with today's program. We'll give a little bit of time to get people in there and getting connected. We can see our ticker going up and there's more and more people connecting either in LinkedIn or in Facebook. And we're really looking forward to a great conversation with you today. We want to hear your questions. We also want to hear your perspectives. So if you've got a very strong view about emotional intelligence, please share that as well. It's not just about questions that you might ask of me and the team. It can also be something where you've got an opinion that you want to express and that you want to hear people talk about. So Rika has added that she's joining from Manila. So great to see that we've got our audience. They're very strong in the Philippines, the audience of the Leadership Project. And it's great to see you here today again, Rika. And we've got Joanne, really excited to hear more about emotional intelligence. So we're starting to get a few people in. Absolutely wonderful. And we'll get started momentarily to talk about our topic of the day. There are some things that I'd like to share with you. We've got more people coming in now. We've got Faris here joining from Singapore as well. So very much an international audience. And we've got Rika asking, how does context affect emotional intelligence? So that's a great question, and I'm sure that we're going to be able to cover that today throughout, because we do have a very contextual situation that we'll be talking about, but it also applies to your emotional intelligence in everything that you do in your life. So thank you for that question, Rika. As you do put questions into the chat, if you can please put a Q in front of the question It will help me to find those questions later. It just helps me to filter on the different questions that we're getting. We've got our someone here from LinkedIn, Gerald Calabo, who is our social media manager. Great to see you, Gerald. Good morning. Also joining from Cavite in the Philippines. Very much an international audience today. So thank you for joining us. As we go in, I'd just like to share a few announcements with you. First one, very exciting, is that we are celebrating our 50th episode of the Leadership Project podcast this week, which is just a wonderful achievement. And I'd particularly like to thank my team here and Faris Sadek in particular. I get the easy job. I get to interview thought leaders from around the world that challenge my thinking, and I get to ask them questions every week that help me to quench my insatiable curiosity. What Faris does then is he has to sit there and sift through it all. He has to do all of the audio editing. He creates those amazing videos that we produce every week where he edits down to the key topic of that week, and he creates what we call an edited or a curated video where he blends in the B-roll and music and graphics to make it more edutainment. We're acutely aware that not everyone will sit down to listen to an hour-long podcast interview, but some people still want to get that message. So Faris creates those videos. They can be anything from 3 minutes long to 12 minutes long, and they pick that key topic and it goes out onto YouTube. And here's another one joining from Taguig in the Philippines as well. So thank you everyone that is joining. So the first thing, congratulations to my team. Thank you so much for all that you do. And for anyone that hasn't yet listened to the Leadership Project podcast, it is available on all of the usual podcast directories. So if you listen through Spotify, through Apple Podcasts, through Stitcher, there's all kinds of ones. It's on Audible, it's on iHeartRadio. If there's somewhere where you listen to podcasts, you're going to be able to find access to the Leadership Project podcast. We're very excited that for the 50th episode, we were joined by Stephen Shedleski, or Shed, better known as Shed. Everyone in the world kind of knows him as Shed, and he's famous for his posts on LinkedIn that do create these thought-provoking conversations about what's happening in our workplaces. And in particular, Shed is in the process of writing a much-needed book about speak-up culture. Speak-up culture is that ability for people to have open conversations, to have a high level of candor in their organizations with low fear, the ability to speak up. Some people would call it psychological safety, but if you listen to the episode, you'll hear that Shed has a slightly different view of that term, which is great. And he really helps us to address some of the ways that psychological safety is misinterpreted. So psychological safety is not about having a lovey-dovey environment where everyone just loves each other and is nice to each other. No, that's not it at all. It also includes things like accountability and responsibility, but it's that ability for people to express their opinion with candor without fear of retribution or fear of judgment. And this episode is just amazing. We're so happy that Shed was able to make it for our 50th episode. And with that being the case, what we're equally excited to share with you is he's going to join us on the show next week. So our live stream next week is with Shed, and you're going to be able to ask your questions and share your opinions about psychological safety and about this concept of speak up culture. So please do join us for the live stream next week. I know that a lot of people are watching the replays of the show afterwards, which is great, and we're glad that you're able to enjoy the show in that way. But the advantage of joining us here live is that ability to express your opinion and to have it shown up on the screen, to be able to ask those questions that you might have about psychological safety, about speak up culture, and to have a deep expert like Shed to be able to answer those for you in a live situation. one more advertisement before we get into today's content is that we are now taking applications for our Gateway to High Performance Leadership Program. The next cohort is going to start in early May. This program goes over a period of 8 weeks, 8 different modules, and really flips leadership development on its head. We take a new approach. We embrace modern techniques, including collaborative or social learning, gamification, and micro-learning to make sure that the learning that you achieve is something that you can practically go and put into your businesses. So to turn learning into applied learning. Far too many programs out there have you go on a 5-day retreat or something like that where you learn lots of things. You get new knowledge, new concepts, but you don't have the ability to go and put it into practice. And you return back to your workplace and exactly nothing happens, or very little at least. So we're very excited about our program. It's been very successful so far, getting true transformation in the leaders that have been going through the program. And if you would like to achieve that transformation and to unlock the keys to high performance leadership, please do get in contact with Joanne Goes On, the email address on your screen. And if someone can put that in the chat so everyone can see it, and I'll also share it on the screen as well. Please, Joanne, if you're watching, please do put your email address in the chat right now so that people can get access to that and are able to join our program. So without further ado, it is now time to get into today's content. And there's no other way that we can call it. We're just going to call it the incident. So I know that everyone in the audience would know what we're talking about when we say the incident, but we're talking about Will Smith and Chris Rock. So Will Smith going up onto the stage after was what was probably a tasteless joke. Let's call it how it is. It wasn't that funny and it wasn't in good taste, but it was the reaction then at that moment that Will Smith chose to go up onto the stage and to slap Chris Rock in front of a live audience of 1 billion people, and people have not stopped talking about it since. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, this incident, but we're going to be unpacking it to understand what we can learn from it. And there we go. We've got Joanne's email address there on the screen now. If you would like to be part of the next cohort of the Gateway to High Performance Leadership, please do send your details to Joanne and she'll be in contact with you to talk about the program. So we go into the incident and we're going to unpack it. And the angle that we're going to be looking at here is about emotional intelligence. To start with, and I'll share some knowledge, and then I want to hear from you, your perspectives and also your questions. So emotional intelligence is all about your ability to perceive, use, control, and evaluate emotions, your own emotions and the emotions of others. And what we've seen here in the incident is examples of 2 different people being able to do that in different ways in their context. I want to share with you that Daniel Goleman has done deep research here. He's pretty much considered the father of emotional intelligence, and he's shown pretty much categorically that you are twice as likely to be successful with emotional intelligence compared to IQ. And to twist that a different way, that emotional intelligence is twice as important as an indicator of your future success than comparisons to IQ. So I can't emphasize enough just how important it is for all of us to sharpen our emotional intelligence. But the good news here is that emotional intelligence can be trained. It's something that you can be taught. It's something that you can learn, but it's also a muscle. It's a muscle that through practice, you can get better at every single day, but it takes that deliberate practice. We're going to unpack some of that today as to what you might be able to do to get there. When Goleman first codified a lot of this work, which was based on his predecessors as well, they came up with 4 focus areas, which were self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and relationships. And subsequently, they've kind of talking about a fifth category, which is a subset of self-management, which is about your ability to self-motivate. So how do you get emotions to work for you instead of against you, which of course is taking things to the next level. You're not just managing those emotions, you're getting those emotions to work for you in very much a motivational type approach. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Here's a great question from Gerald coming through, which is, how do you know if you are emotionally intelligent? And I'll talk about that right now. There are some techniques. Self-awareness is what it starts with, Gerald, for sure. But there are some assessment frameworks out there. And I don't have any content on this today, but if you want to know more about it, we can discuss this. There's a toolkit called EQI 2.0, where you can go through a survey and an assessment with a certified practitioner who can look at your levels of emotional intelligence across a bunch of different categories, and to help you to work out an action plan on where you might need to sharpen the saw and which category you might wish to work on. So thank you for that question, Gerald. We don't cover EQI 2.0 in today's discussion, but if you do want to know more about that, of course, we'd be very happy to help you with that. Okay, so that's our 5 focus areas. Let's break down the first 2 in regards to our incident. So when we look at it, we start with this self-awareness. Self-awareness is that ability to know and recognize one's own emotions, to be able to identify it, to be able to name it, to be able to understand what are our emotional triggers. What are the things that set us off? Are there particular topics? Are there particular people? Is there a particular environment that might set us up for an emotional reaction? And it's to be aware of our mood and how that mood might influence our thoughts about how we feel about that mood itself, but also how we feel at that moment. It's that ability to be able to name it and notice those emotions in a non-judgmental way is the key here to self-awareness. So you might be asking yourself inside these kind of questions. What emotion am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this emotion? And why am I feeling this emotion right now? How is it serving me? Is it a positive emotion that can actually help me to motivate myself and get out there? Or is it not serving me? Is it holding me back? Is it going to become something that is a limiting factor in what I'm trying to achieve at this point? Is it impacting my judgment? So is that feeling that I've got right now influencing the way that I see the world, but also the way that I act? And is it impacting others around me? So you've probably heard all kinds of stories about, people walk around the office and they'll say things like, oh, is the boss in a good mood today? If people are asking that kind of question, that's a signal that your emotions are influencing the way that you present yourself in the world and in your business. And what that will mean is people will pick and choose when they come and talk to you. And that's not good for openness and transparency. People shouldn't be going to your peers around you and saying, is the boss in a good mood today, before they come to you with either presenting a new idea or presenting bad news. So is it impacting others around you? Self-management is then the ability to handle those emotions. What are we going to do with them? And you'll notice the word is management. It's not ignore, it's not suppress, it's not numb. It is to diffuse the emotions that are not serving us and to have a measured response to that emotion, not a reaction to that emotion. So control, harness. How do you leverage this emotion? How do you regulate this emotion? This is what we're talking about. We're not talking about the ignorance of emotion. So I've got a question coming in here. Some people have a hard time naming their emotions. I like your point of, are you in a good mood today? So it can be difficult to name these emotions. And there is a thing called an emotional wheel. Maybe we'll get a copy of that and put that in the chat. There's an emotion wheel that can help you identify and name those emotions, because it can be difficult for people to be aware of that. Further than that, the emotion wheel then also helps you to understand whether there's a need involved. Emotions, when you feel them, are trying to tell you something. If it's a positive emotion, that emotion is trying to reward you that a need has been met. It might be the need for love and belonging, might be the need for freedom, whatever that need is. When you get that, it might be the need for fun. When you get that positive emotion, your brain is rewarding you and saying, do more of that, please. And when you have a negative emotion, it's usually a reflection of an unmet need. So if you're feeling anger, why? Is it a survival instinct? Is it a lack of love and belonging? Is it the feeling of oppression has put you in that state? So it is challenging, Olga, for sure. And it does take practice. And asking people about moods and talking about moods is a way to get into the practice of doing so. Okay. So we're not talking about suppressing emotion. We're not talking about ignoring emotion. We're talking about regulating, controlling, and managing emotion. The next question to ask yourself in these situations is, which brain is active right now for you, if you're the one that's feeling it, or another person, if you're seeing someone in some kind of emotional state. So for this, which brain is active? You've got 3 different parts of the brain. You've got the neocortex, which is responsible for rational thought. You've got the limbic brain, which is responsible for emotional thought and decision making. And this is why we always say that people make decisions emotionally and they justify them rationally. And then you've got the root brain, which is your fight or flight mechanism. This is when your survival is feeling threatened, you are feeling threatened, and you get into this fight or flight mechanism. That's the root brain. So one of the things that you can be asking yourself is, where am I right now? Not easy to do if you're the one that's in the root brain, by the way, but it is a good way to check in with yourself and have that self-awareness. And if you see someone else in an emotional outburst, once again, ask your question, where are they at? And there are some ways that you can regulate this. It's well documented, for example, that the simple process of breathing can move you from the root brain back into the limbic brain or even the neocortex. So putting a hand on the stomach and taking a few deliberate deep breaths, breathing in, holding it for a period of 3 seconds, and breathing out. And doing that for 7, 8, 9, 10 times in a row is scientifically proven to get you out of that fight or flight mechanism and getting you back to either the limbic brain or the neocortex being the one that's in charge. The next one is the process of actually naming that emotion in the first place. That is a rational thought. So if you're able to stop, pause, reflect, and to be able to talk about the emotion that you're having, that also can put you into the neocortex because you're starting to rationalize your thoughts. And it's a way to regulate emotion. Not ignore it, regulate your emotion. So that's another way. All right, so question from my wife. Always lovely to have my wife watching the show, and I think my son is with her as well. So thank you. Hi, Thomas, and thank you, Say, for the question. How do you deal with a bad day? That's a great question. So, and it's the same things. You're going to notice and name the emotions that you're having. But then you might do that second step that I spoke about. Ask yourself why you're feeling that emotion and why you're feeling it now. Is there a need that hasn't been met, that hasn't been addressed, that you can go and do something about? That is a wonderful way to deal with a bad day. Take those few deep breaths, notice and name the emotion that you're feeling, and then explore why you might be having that emotion. And if you're able to process that and identify a need that has not been met, you can then go and do something about it. So wonderful question, my darling wife. Thank you. And I hope the audience got some benefit from that answer as well as you and I. I learn something new every day as well. Okay, so what is going on here? We've talked about self-awareness and we've talked about self-management. So if you just take it this picture, photo credit to CNN here and using the fair use rule that we're going to comment about this incident. Have a look at his eyes. Have a look at his posture. What is he processing? What is going on in this person's mind right now? And we can't analyze in real time. If we were there, we might have different feelings. We can't get inside Will Smith's brain, but we can start having some empathy and start looking and go, what's processing here? So he's heard a joke that he's taken offense to, but then what has he done? What has he chosen to do? Has he named and noticed that emotion and decided to regulate that emotion? Or has he done the opposite? Has he let the emotion be the one to come to the surface and maybe regulate him? Which brain is he using at this time? Is it fight or flight, or is it something else? And we've got a question here from my team coming through. It's a good time to ask this one. If you're in Will Smith's position, how do you recover and respond now that damage has been done, especially with how cancel culture is prevalent nowadays? That's a great question. I'm going to come back to that at the end. And if I do forget, please do repost that question. But we'll talk about, well, what does he do from here? Because he potentially has done some irreparable damage to his reputation with his actions. Okay. All right. So he has had an emotional reaction and he's let his root brain get away and he's gone into fight or flight mode, and he did not take the opportunity to stop, take a few deep breaths, breathe in, breathe out, notice and name the emotion, process it, and then respond. Instead, he's reacted, and his reaction was the slap. Now I want to ask a different question, because we've spoken a lot about Will Smith in the past week and a bit. What did Chris Rock do? Chris Rock is on a stage. We're not talking enough about Chris. Chris is on a stage in front of an audience of 1 billion people, plus the live audience of his peers and colleagues. And someone has come up on the stage and slapped him. What did he do? And his reaction is just as important as Will's. He's done the opposite. And if you watch the video back, please do in your own time on this one. If you watch the video back, you can see that he takes his time. He breathes. He even purposely smiles, and he starts processing what's going on. And then one of his defensive reactions is then to tell another joke. He's a comedian. That's probably his sweet spot, and that probably works for him. But what did he not do? He did not react on the spot. He took time. Once again, we don't know what went on in Chris's mind, but what we do know for sure is he was processing. In fact, if you read recent articles, people are saying that he's still processing it, which is also okay. It's okay to take your time to process that emotion before you respond and react. Here's a wonderful question from Gerald. When is it not okay to be not okay? That's an excellent question. I'm in a reflective state now from that question. I'm going to say predominantly it's always okay to not be okay and to stick up your hand and ask for help when you need it. There are moments in time, such as crisis management, where you may need to play a role at that moment to be able to get through a moment in time and then process it afterwards. So I'm going to say it's always okay to be not okay, pretty much, Gerald. But there are some contextual situations, coming back to Rika's question at the start, where in a crisis management situation where you may need to delay the processing of that emotion to get through what you're getting through and then debrief later. That would be one thing. So if you're in an emergency situation, a crisis situation, you may need to just let that pass and process it later. Wonderful question, Gerald. I really appreciate that. Got a question here for Joanne. If you're in Will Smith's position, how do you recover? That's similar to the one that was asked earlier, and we'll come back to that one shortly. Okay. Question from my wife. If you're in Will Smith's shoes, what are you going to do? Someone else bullied me in front of other people or even posted something else against me. Wonderful question. And here we go. It's right on the spot, isn't it? So what I wouldn't do is immediately react with something that was driven by emotion, but I would act. I am not saying to suppress these emotions. I'm not saying to not react and stand up for what you believe is right. So if in the same situation, if we were sitting in that hall and Chris Rock was making fun of my wife, I would respond, but it'd be a measured response to make sure that he understood that that was not acceptable and not appropriate. What it wouldn't have been is to stand up and let my root brain take over and to slap him on national television or international television in front of 1 billion people. Now, I'm not judging Will, to be clear. Will Smith lives in a different world to all of us. He lives in a pressure cooker where eyes are always on, paparazzi, all of those things. None of us can completely embody what Will goes through every day. His life is a public life, and that pressure must build up over time, and potentially he doesn't have the right mechanisms to be able to release those emotions, right? So am I saying, OMG, that's incredible, he's a bad person? No, I'm not, and I'm not judging him. But if I was in the situation, I would have handled it differently. So wonderful question, but I would have defended your honor, say, to be clear, but I would have done it in a different way. Okay. All right, Juliana, there is a third stage in that, and that is the standing ovation by the crowd. What are your thoughts on that one, Mick? That's a good question. Are you thinking about the standing ovation was there a standing ovation at the time, or are you talking about when he got the Academy Award? Maybe you can clarify that in the chat, but I'll continue on and say you've then got a question about what behavior do we accept? And the behavior that we accept, either implicitly or explicitly, then sends a signal to everyone else about what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not acceptable. So the standing ovation, I can't put myself in the mind of every single person that was in that audience. I'm going to say that a number of them were probably applauding Chris Rock for his measured response when he won the award. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've got mixed thoughts on that one. So when he won the award is the comment that's now come through. He's an amazing actor, and I think his performances, he was probably overdue for an award. He then apologized, but the apology at the time, I also think, was not well thought through. And if he had his time again, he might have done a better job of that apology at the time. But he's probably still emotionally charged at that moment, Juliana. So I would say that emotions are still rushing, new emotions too. The euphoria of winning the award, plus the regret of, by this time, starting to think that he's done the wrong thing. And probably the speech probably came at the wrong time. And if the speech had been a little bit later, he would have had longer to actually have processed the emotions, and he would have done a better job of the apology at that time. He has subsequently done a much better apology, but that's with the passing of time and being able to perhaps process the events and process the emotions himself. So the crowd were probably pleased to see that he did apologize at the time. Once again, I don't want to second guess what every single person in the audience was thinking. They were probably pleased that he was apologizing for what he had done. They were probably pleased for him that a long career was getting result in some recognition that was probably due. But I'd also say that others probably found that the apology was not executed very well at that time either. Okay, so the two things I want you to take away there is that you've got two sides of this story. You've got one person who responded with their root brain and another person that processed the emotion before they responded and has not even still fully responded yet because he's still processing it. He's only partially responded to the event. And this one really sums it up for me in terms of the event from T.D. Jakes. Never make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion. So what Will has done, and coming back to the questions around cancel culture, is that he has made a permanent decision based on it. He can't take that back now. And I'm sure he has regret, but it can't be taken back. So if he had his time over again, I'm sure he would have taken a few deep breaths. He would have named and noticed the emotion and responded in a different way. But he has done it now. So back to Joanne's question from before, what does he do now? And what he can be doing, and I'm not here to give him advice at all, but what he can be doing is making sure that the more sincere apology that he's now given is followed through and people see it as authentic, and that he takes the actions to help others to process their emotions. So he stands in a position of influence where he can now talk about the event, maybe go on the Oprah show, whatever he wants to do, talk about the event so all of us can learn about it would be what he can do from here, Joanne. And by doing so, he should be in a position where he can start to rebuild the damage that has been done, but it won't be easy. So yeah, another wonderful question. And thank you. Please do keep them coming. All right. This is coming back to Rika's question from earlier. How does context affect one's self-awareness and self-regulation? How do you protect yourself from being vulnerable to your emotions? Yeah, that's a great question as well, Rika. So vulnerability is a very good thing. Being able to speak about your emotions in an open way, but doing so at the right time to the right measure. And we've got an interesting quote coming up from Aristotle that really helps you with this situation. So vulnerability is a good thing, but being able to process that vulnerability is where the power comes in. So not letting those emotions get away on you, getting that ability to name and notice the emotions, to take those deep breaths, and then decide which response is going to serve you. What is the response that's going to serve you best is the way that you make sure that you don't become vulnerable to your emotions. So that's a wonderful question there, Rika. Thank you. All right, so Gerald, when is teasing in good fun and when is it bullying? There's no clear and good answer to that one. That one does require context as well, Gerald, but I would say that there is no place in any workplace for sure where bullying or even teasing belongs, because what might be teasing for you might be generating a complete feeling of exclusion from the other person. I'm sure you can think of examples where teasing is done in good nature, but it has to be mutual. If the other person does not take it the same way that you intended, it's just as bad as bullying. So to me, there is, people will say that there's a fine line. To me, there is no line. There is no line. And empathy should be kicking in, and for you to realize that that innocent teasing is creating a pattern of behavior that then could lead to a situation where someone feels excluded. From Juliana, do you think that being in a crowd can affect emotional intelligence? E.g., no action or speaking up when the slap took place. If you were alone with the two, surely we would stop it. Yeah, so there is a crowd effect here. And this is what we call reflective learning. People start looking around and everyone wants to feel loved and they want to feel this sense of belonging. and there's a lot of science to this, Juliana, where people amongst a crowd will want to fit in. Their need for tribalism and wanting to fit in with the group around them will make them do things that when they look at it later, they might say were against their values and beliefs, but they get caught up in the moment. So that crowd effect is absolutely something that you need to be aware of. Some of the scientific studies around this tribalism and this crowd effect. There was an example of a study that scientists in Canada did where they had a room full of people where there were 9 actors and 1 person that was the subject of the experiment. And they were asking these questions where it was obvious what the answer was. So they'd have these lines, they'd have 5 lines, and they'd say, okay, which line is the shortest? And the 9 actors would give a false answer. They'd say number 3 when it was number 4. And the funny thing is it gets to the 10th person who was the real person, not the actor, and they would say number 3, even though they knew the answer was not wrong, because it was wrong because they didn't want to feel like they didn't fit in. So don't underestimate this. The 5 primal needs that people have. This comes from Glass's choice theory. So the needs that people have: survival, love and belonging, power. And power is really about mattering, by the way. It can have negative connotations, that word power, but when Glasser talks about it, he talks about the need to want to feel like you matter. The 4th one is fun, and the 5th one is freedom, and that's freedom of choice and freedom from oppression. So when you're in a situation where you tap against one of those 5 fundamental needs of a human being, the funny things can shift. That need for love and belonging can outweigh the need to be right, as an example. That's a wonderful question, Julian. I feel like you and I could talk about that one for 3 or 4 hours and we wouldn't have gotten to the bottom of all of it, but I love that question. All right, Daniel Williams. Oh my God, Daniel, I haven't seen you in such a long time. It's so good to see you, and thank you for joining in the show. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how Chris Rock held himself. Obviously, he's in front of everyone and has had to react and deal with something totally unexpected, something I'm sure could happen to anyone presenting. That's a great question, and that's the 2 sides of this story, Daniel. So yes, we're unpacking a lot Will Smith's reaction, but I want to give high praise to Chris Rock's reaction. He really did process it, and he's still processing it. So he took that time. This thing happened in front of him that would have created, I'm sure, an emotional reaction. His root brain probably kicked in at one point where he wanted to fight back, right? But he took a few deep breaths. You can tell that he was processing it on the stage. He didn't react immediately at all. He took some time to think it through and process and breathe. And then his coping mechanism was to then tell another joke. And as a comedian, that's a little bit of his wheelhouse. You could argue 2 things here. You could just say he's the ultimate professional and his job was the MC of the show and he stayed professional. But in my view, it was more than that. He was able to have emotional management. His self-management of his emotions at that time is something that I believe needs to be commended and probably needs to be talked about just as much as we're talking about Will Smith's incorrect or inappropriate reaction to his emotion. So great question, Daniel. Great to see you. And I would say that he did an amazing job of controlling his emotions and regulating his emotions at that point. Doesn't mean that he shouldn't talk about it and then go and process it and do something about it. And should he be having conversations with Will about how he felt about all of this? Yes. So he shouldn't suppress those emotions, but he did the right thing at the time to regulate his response to those emotions. So yeah, great question, Daniel. Thank you. I said that we'd talk about the rest of the types of emotional intelligence. I'll go over them briefly because the 2 key ones today were around self-awareness and self-management. The next one is about self-motivation, and there's people like Michael Jordan that are incredible about this. The ability to take that emotion and harness it and make it work for you, not against you. To be able to use stress as your friend instead of your enemy. And you can see here the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which shows you that stress can actually help you to perform at your optimal, but too much stress tips you over the other side. This is also what relates to things like impulse control and optimism and getting into a flow state. So Michael Jordan would do things like he would tell himself stories in his head about the opposition to get himself riled up so that he would go out there in an optimal stress state to perform, to use emotion to his benefit, not to have emotion work against him, but to have emotion work for him, as an example. And this is the next level of self-management. So self-management is controlling and regulating that emotion. Self-motivation is then going, how do I use that emotion to serve me instead of serving against me? The next level, empathy. We could do an entire series of live streams about empathy, and I'll just leave you with that there are 3 different types. So cognitive empathy is that ability to understand someone else's perspective, the famous story of walking a mile in someone's shoes. Emotional empathy is the ability to understand how they feel and seeing the whole of the person. And then empathic concern is really feeling it with them. It's like compassion and wanting to do something about it. And there's some words of caution around empathic concern. Of course, it's a wonderful thing, but what you need to be careful of is that you don't become the person that carries the weight of 10 people's problems on your shoulders. So empathic concern is a good thing, but you need to be careful that you're not then a walking time bomb of your own stress because you're carrying empathic concern for others everywhere you go. And you also need to be careful that your empathic concern does not lead you to a suboptimal help mechanism. So sometimes the person just wants someone to talk to, and you don't need to go into solutioning mode. And going into solutioning mode may not help them in the way that you think it may. So empathic concern is wonderful. Just be a little careful about how you deal with it. And if I was to summarize all of this today into this quote, this is emerging as potentially my new favorite quote, but it's certainly my favorite quote when it comes to emotional intelligence. And you think about this very carefully with both Will Smith and Chris Rock. Anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right reason, and in the right way, this is not easy. That's what emotional intelligence is. It's not to suppress your emotions and never feel them or to ignore them. It's not to be all emotional and reactional and being emotional at every drop of a hat. It's about becoming angry when you need to, because there's a reason to, with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right reason, and in the right way. And you can replace that word angry right now with any other emotion, and this quote still stacks up. So if you take anything away from today's live stream, I want you to think about this quote from Aristotle and think about, well, what does that mean for all types of emotions, and how might you use that to full effect? Has there ever been a time when you felt needed to change your behavior, especially at work? So this is my wife again, another probing question. She asks wonderful questions. Thank you so much. Yes, the answer is yes. And that's when I catch myself in a situation where I realize that my emotions are impacting my judgment. And there's been multiple occasions throughout my career, and I learn something new every day. I think everyone in the audience knows that I practice self-reflection every day, where I ask myself the same questions at the end of every day. What went well today? What didn't go well today? What would I do differently next time if I had my time again? What did I learn today? And what did I learn about myself today? And this enables you to continue to improve on that emotional intelligence so that you do ensure that your emotions are not unduly, important word, you don't want your emotions to unduly impact your decision making. Let your emotions impact your decision making in the right way, just like Aristotle says, but don't let them unduly impact your decision making. And the other one, opening up a different topic here, the other one, say, would be where I found myself with bias creeping in. So whether that be implicit bias, which is usually the case, or some kind of conscious bias, where I've had to check myself and go, oh, hang on a second. Is my decision or my behavior at the moment being influenced by bias? So that would be the second one. So emotion and bias. And the answer is 100%. I would say it happens at least once a week. But as long as you learn from it each time and as long as you keep on getting better, then that is okay. Wonderful questions. There have been so many great questions today. Please do keep them coming. I did mention about the self-reflection journal. I'd like to mention that you can get a copy of that on our website. So Self-Reflection Journal is available for free download on mickspiers.com. So if you would like to learn more about how to bring self-reflection into your life to become a better leader day by day, please do go to our website and download that free journal. I'm also really excited to tell you that my book went to the copy editor yesterday. So it's been a long time coming. I've been working on it for quite some time, but I stopped tinkering with it finally, and it went off to the copy editor tomorrow. So therefore, we're only a matter of weeks away from the release of my book, You're a Leader, Now What? And we are calling for people who would like to be part of our launch team for that book. So being in the launch team, what's involved there is you get early access to the book, and you get get it at a much reduced price, 99 cents. And in return, what we expect you to be able to do is to put up an honest review of the book on Amazon, which really helps us to get the Amazon algorithm talking about the book and promoting it to other people. So if you would like to be involved in the launch team of the book, please do get in contact with me or one of the team. Probably Rika is the best one to get in contact with. Rika, can you put your email address in the chat as well, please? So that's irene.vedanis@mickspiers.com, and we'd love to have you as part of that. Next week's topic is going to be around speak up culture, and in some respects we've touched on elements of it today when we talk about emotional intelligence, but absolutely delighted to have Shed with us next week, Stephen Shedleski. He is writing a new book on speak up culture and on psychological safety, a book that's very much needed in the market today. And you're going to have the opportunity to ask him questions. So he is the podcast of the week this week. Our 50th episode of the Leadership Project podcast was Stephen Shedleski. And now you have the opportunity next week to be able to ask him questions live and to get those questions answered. So thank you, Rika. There's her email address, irene.vedanis@mickspiers.com, if you would like to be part of the launch team for the book. Okay, and here's a great one, Gerald. Last question. How do you not let your personal life affect your work? That's a wonderful question. And that comes down to emotional intelligence as well, and boundaries. Not easy in a work from home environment to have those boundaries, to be able to have that ability to be able to separate work from your home life, when for many people it's under the same roof right now. So having boundaries, and I don't always get that right, that's for sure, Gerald, but having those boundaries, it can also be to have anchor points. Could be something like walking through a doorway, that when you walk through that doorway to get into your office, that you take a few deep breaths and you reset and go, okay, whatever emotion I was feeling in my home life, that I leave that at the door, and then I bring my authentic self into the room ready for work. So it is important. It's okay, by the way, to have those emotions, to process them, to notice and name them, to use those emotions to positive effect. What's not okay is when your emotions unduly impact your decision making and your actions. So I hope that helps, Gerald, and that was a wonderful question. Okay, that brings us to a close for today. We do hope that you've really enjoyed today's live show. One last chance while I'm closing out. If anyone does have any last questions, do post them now. I'd love to be able to answer them for you. And I'll just remind you as we do close out about some of the things that we do have here at the Leadership Project podcast. I'd like to remind you that you can listen to the Leadership Project podcast on your preferred podcast service. So we're on all of them, right? So we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, we're on Audible, we're on Stitcher, Castbox, you name it, you'll be able to find the Leadership Project podcast. I'd also like to encourage you to join the Leadership Project Facebook community group where we continue the conversations. We're always asking great questions in there and getting audience opinions about different things, all things leadership, to challenge the status quo, right? So our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo and for us to create leaders who then in turn create amazing teams and amazing workspaces. And for us, those workspaces are ones where everyone feels like they matter, where everyone's voice is heard and their opinions are valued, and where everyone has purpose and meaning in what they do. And we talk a lot about these topics in the Facebook community group. I'd also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So Faris does these amazing videos every week of the different topics where he blends in the B-roll and the graphics and the music and really creates these edutainment kind of content that gives you the key message in a way that is also entertaining at the same time. So please do subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can catch that. I'm not seeing any more questions come in, but I am seeing some thank yous. So thank you from Gerald for the amazing insights and wisdom, and to really pull apart the Will Smith and the Chris Rock incident. And remember, just like Daniel said, there were two sides to that. Be as much in awe of Chris Rock's ability to respond appropriately as we are questioning whether Will Smith overstepped and whether he could have done that a better way into the future. And from Joanne, awesome session today. Thank you. Lots of insights and thought-provoking insights there. So, and also from Rika as well, thanking for the session. So that's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much. Please do enjoy your time. Go away and think about this. Think about your own emotional intelligence and how important it is. For today, think about self-awareness and self-management. And then there are 3 other topics that you can explore for emotional intelligence, which are the self-motivation. How do you make those emotions work for you instead of against you? Empathy. How do you interpret the emotions of others so that you can be there for them and build amazing relationships with them? So thank you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all next week for Stephen Shedleski as we talk about speak up culture and psychological safety.